welcome to our session at the Oxford Real Farming Conference, where we're going to be exploring the kind of tools that can make lasting change for our agri-food systems across the world, and whether we need some new tools. My name's Liz Bowles. I'm the Associate Director for Farming and Land Use at the Soil Association, and it's my delightful job this afternoon to chair this session and to introduce you to our four eminent speakers. So nowadays, we are all beginning to realise that agriculture has a pivotal role to play in enabling the change that means we can deal with the crises of climate, nature and health that we currently face. However, that change it's not happening fast enough, and there's no real sign of nature recovery across the globe as yet. And if you look at the emissions from agriculture, they're actually rising as a proportion of overall emissions across the globe as other sectors reduce the total volumes of the emissions that they produce. So right now we're at something of a crossroads, and we need a transformation to happen, and we need that really to happen quite quickly, and for farmers to really be incentivized to know that farming with nature is the best option for all of them. And today, in our session today, we're going to be exploring the role of labels, of verification, of organic certification as tools to drive the lasting change that we all want to see. I'll also be asking the question of whether there's any other tools that we perhaps need to be developing in order to help us to make this transformation that we all need to see. I would say that over the last 18 months, the interest in this kind of area has really exploded with that realization that farmers hold the key. But with that interest has arrived a whole load of new labels, new schemes, and for farmers themselves, it's often really hard to know which is the best option for them to adopt. So today, we've assembled a panel of four eminent speakers who are going to help us to navigate this area and to address the question of which tools deliver the best impact and whether we need some new ones. So today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce all our four speakers, and then I'm going to ask each of them to really respond to that question. And after each speaker, there's an opportunity for any immediate questions that you might have, and then we'll move on until all the speakers have really made their case. And then we're going to have an opportunity, hopefully in the last 20 minutes of the session, to have a debate with all of you. So please do post your questions into the chat for that. So today then, if we can put all our speakers up so we can see them, we've got Louise Lutticolt from iFoam Organics International. Louise will be speaking first. She comes from a farming background in the east of Holland. And secondly, the second speaker is Harry Farnsworth from ControlUnion. He's their project lead on sustainable agriculture, and he's leading the development of the Regen Agri initiative in the UK. Our third speaker is Joshua Wickerham. He's the membership and engagement manager at ISEAL, the global membership organization for collaborative sustainability systems. And the fourth speaker this afternoon is Sarah Thompson. She's the International Development Manager for the Soil Association and the Organic Cotton Ambassador for the Textile Exchange. So I think you'd all agree with me that we really have some speakers who can address this topic, and hopefully we'll really get a great debate going. So firstly then, Louise, I'd like to ask you to address that question. And I know that you've got a short film that you'd like to present first. So perhaps if we could show the film and then go directly to Louise. Thank you.
ഞാൻ ശിവരാമൻ. ഞാനൊരു അധ്യാപകനോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു കാർഷിക ശാസ്ത്രജ്ഞനോ ഒന്നുമല്ല. വെറും 2 ഏക്കർ സ്ഥലം കൃഷി ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു സാധാരണ കർഷകൻ. പുരയിട കൃഷി എന്ന വിഷയമാണ് നമ്മളിവിടെ ചർച്ച ചെയ്യുന്നത്. പുരയുടെ കൃഷി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മുടെ പറമ്പിൽ നമ്മുടെ പുരയിടത്തിലുള്ളതായ വസ്തുക്കളെ മാത്രം ഉപയോഗിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു കൃഷിയാണ്. പുറമേ നിന്ന് ഒരു സാധനവും നമ്മൾ വാങ്ങിട്ട് വരില്ല. കൃഷിയുടെ പ്രധാന ഘടകം മണ്ണാണ്. മണ്ണിന് ആരോഗ്യം ഉണ്ടെങ്കിലേ മനുഷ്യന് ആരോഗ്യമുള്ളൂ എന്നുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യം നമ്മൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കണം.
Hi everyone, my name is Sylvia Kuria, a small-scale farmer from Nairobi, Kenya, and I would like to share with you about the power of kitchen gardens. 10 years ago, my family moved to a nearby village to Nairobi known as Limuru, and our parents gave us half an acre of land to grow our food. And most people told me, that land is too small, you'll get nothing out of it. And they were right to an extent, because if I grew only one crop, say only maize or only cabbages or only beans, I would not get any profit and I would not get anything from that half an acre. But I decided to grow all my family food. I decided to grow everything that we ate, and we planted all our greens, we planted fruits, we planted carrots, potatoes, onions, name it. And in a few months' time, I actually realized that I had more than enough food for my family. And that's how my business, Sylvia's Basket, was born. And I was able to sell my organic baskets to other mothers just like me in the city who wanted to make sure that their children and their families were eating safe organic produce.
So yeah, thank you, Liz, for the introduction. I wanted to show this little video on the International Year on Fruits and Vegetables to present two farmers to us who are doing an excellent job. They're doing an excellent job in growing their fruits and vegetables organically. They don't need to label it. They don't have any subsidy. They are just intrinsically interested in producing good food without external inputs. And that's the point that I wanted to come to. So in this session, we're going to talk about labels, going to talk about standards and certification. But I want to make the point that first of all, organic agriculture is about the practices and is about the farmers who do well and who contribute to the public good. Now, of course, we want to make sure that these farmers who produce for the public good also get a good price, because they contribute a lot to our overall well-being. And there, I think, standards actually come in. So standards and certification are then a tool to make sure that these two very good farmers also have a fair access to the market and that consumers can recognize their produce. I'm the executive director of iFarm Organics International, and our organization exists since 1972. And it was founded by a couple of organizations, Soil Association included actually, because they wanted to exchange about their practices. And very often what then happens if you exchange about practices, you write them down in standards. So already in the early 80s, there were standards about organic agriculture. And they were not only there to be to differentiate in the market, but also to learn from each other, to have a common agreement on how you actually can produce organic. Because I think that's the other thing that we should recognize and also appreciate with the two farmers we just saw, that organic farming, farming without pesticides, without the chemical inputs, is really a skill. It's a skillful exercise, and we should actually appreciate our farmers for that. Now, what we've seen from Sylvia and her basket, that obviously she knows the mothers to whom she's selling her baskets to. And they trust her that the food that she's produced is organic. But not everybody of us is in such a position. So that's why certification comes in. And certification can also be done in a very simple way. For instance, at a community level, in a participatory way. We call that participatory guarantee systems. But most of us in this part of the world, at least, we may also go to supermarkets or to other markets, outside markets, where we not necessarily directly know what a farmer is doing. And there's where certification comes in. It's also a guarantee that the claim that they are making is really, really true. And all these farmers, they have to produce in an environment which actually is geared more towards incentives that would, let's say, incentivize farmers to not contribute to the public good, but to do something bad. So that's why it's so important that their produce is recognizable in the market. Now, in the European Union, in Britain, and also in the USA, for instance, over time, the government took over the initiative of the NGOs to then legislate what is organic farming. And for a part, that really helped the organic sector, because that really made sure that when organic is on it, also organic is in it. But sometimes it's also a challenge, because not all the things that are in a holistic system can be standardized in standards. And sometimes also with bringing it to a legislator, you lose the initiative as NGOs. So what we see happening is that on top of some legislative standards that there are, organizations like the Soil Association or others put additional standards on it because they want to improve and make organic better. Now we also see a whole range of other standards and labels coming up, especially labels in the market. And I think it's important for us to distinguish what there's all behind them. Who initiated those labels? Who decided on them? And what's the issue that they are about there? So in the case of organic, it's the organic farmers and the movement themselves who initiated the standards and the labels, and they also decided on it themselves. And the issue here is a holistic one on how can we contribute to more sustainability and how can we actually improve our soil. But there are also labels that, for instance, being imposed by supermarkets, for instance, or maybe by brands. And most of the time, they actually mean a hurdle for farmers to get their produce on the shelves in the first place. Some of the standards are also there only around one issue. Let's say soil, or maybe no-till, but it might go to detriment of a couple of other issues that are also important. For instance, the use of pesticide or how we keep our water clean. So what I would like to say is that the organic sector's initiative of setting up standards in the 80s and 90s has now resulted in clear legislation on what is organic. There's a possibility for NGOs to put some standards on top of that. And we are very careful that when those standards come, that they are always made in a participatory way and farmers have a say for that, so that eventually they can profit from the extra in the market. So far, my contribution for now, Liz.
Very much, Louise. That was fascinating, actually. And I find there's lots of questions I'd like to ask you, but the one I'd like to start by asking you is really about whether you think there's a level playing field in the marketplace for food that's being produced sustainability, and looking at the true cost of food. If you could answer that, that would be really brilliant.
Well, that's a that you raised there, Liz. And indeed, because we don't have a level playing field, that's why we need those standards and certification. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I would like to put it the other way around. If all the produce in the market that was produced with glyphosate would be indicated like that, I think it would be very clear what consumers would be choosing. But currently, it's more advantageous to actually do harm to our environment than to do good. And that has to do with the fact that what we call conventional agriculture has a possibility to externalize their negative impact on the environment, on us all. For instance, on our drinking water that needs to be cleaned, on our health, all these kind of things. So no, there's no level playing field currently, and we try to point that out through a system that we call true cost accounting. And basically the point that we are making in this concept of true cost accounting is that you would have to include all the costs in the product so that consumers can really see the true price of a product. Because currently we pay 4 times for our products, most of the times. We pay taxes to subsidize farmers. We pay at the market or at the counter. We pay taxes to mitigate the externalities, and then we also pay with health costs. However, if we can internalize that all and also oblige all the farmers to take care of these costs one way or the other, or actually, of course, prevent them, because that's what organic farmers do, we will see that prices can be true and honest, and then also these products in the market actually might be more favorable.
Thank you, Louise, and hopefully more healthy for us as well.
That's the whole point.
That's a really great start to our session this afternoon, and Louise will be back in a minute when all our speakers have had their first chance to make their points. So the second speaker this afternoon is Harry Farnsworth from ControlUnion. And again, Harry, I'd like you to address the question about the tools, the kind of tools we need to deliver the best impact in this space, and indeed whether we need any new ones. So Harry, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to say firstly how grateful I am to be asked to talk today. I thought before I give some background on how and where ControlUnion falls into this picture, I'd answer the overarching question to this panel. Is there a best option? And I think a lot of the answer to that question lies in a word: collaboration. So now to work from the beginning. Peace and ControlUnion is an international auditing, commodity inspection and advisory group with expertise across the supply chain in agriculture, fisheries, energy, forestry, sustainability and textiles. We operate in over 70 countries and have been a company for 100 years. This includes 19 organic certification schemes, 9 good agricultural practice standards, and 20 sustainability schemes, and more. So as you can see, this topic is very relevant to our business and is what we audit and advise on daily. I will concede, however, that it can be confusing. It could be a confusing spread of schemes, initiatives, validations, verifications, certifications, and labels that can be laid at the feet of a farmer, or for that matter, a consumer as well. Before I started at ControlUnion, I did not properly understand the difference between when something is verified and certified, how to navigate which is best for that farm, and in some sense, which option can ensure that there is economic longevity and sustainability can be tricky. And I would understand if people listening to this are asking the question, why do we need so many of these standards? Now, to answer that is a slightly harder question, and given the short period of time we have, I will try and condense it down to a few simple thoughts. If we think of farms a bit like we think of people, each farm is very different. Farms can be affected by nature and nurture, much like us. And this makes the way you connect with that farm different, just like with people. Each farm has its own nature profile made up of things like typography, geology, and biodiversity. The surrounding nature affects what and how that farm operates. The nurture of each farm comes from the economic and market conditions of that area and how each operator imprints their ideas, cropping models, livestock, and management processes, which again makes that farm unique. When these two are combined, we have a truly one-off farm. So if we just had one way to advise or to measure how that farm is managed, it'd be very tricky, and it may have a negative effect for some farms. It is because we have such a rich diversity of agriculture globally that this approach would not work. Take example, a farm in a developing country. A developing nation may not have a market for produce to be sold with an organic label, but there is no reason why there shouldn't be a scheme that farmers can work with that helps promote sustainable farming practices to safeguard the longevity of that farm's income and sustain the land. Organic might be that. I can hear some people furiously typing into the chat, but perhaps right now what that farm is better off with is advice and auditing from a movement like Global Gap. I think it's important to point out, though, that these different sustainability standards or agricultural practice standards do have crossover, and how we can make that work for farmers and consumers is another area we need to start to look to collaborate on. Standards and labels also can reflect consumer interests and tastes. If more people want biodynamically produced food and textiles, I'm sure more verification bodies would appear. Schemes also help to protect the farms using them and the people buying produce from fraudulent claims. Investment and financial companies also have a part to play. They have started to and need to increase green investments to help deliver change. Now, the way that many of those investment agreements and bonds work is that the loan giver will need assurance, validation that these practices are happening on the farm. If someone says that they are reducing on-farm emissions, for example, or sequestering carbon, the audit will show if that is taking place, and that can also be verified by a third party. The crossover between economics and sustainability is sometimes undistinguishable, and indeed can be used to great effect to promote good practice. To get back to my original point on collaboration, how can this fit in with a sea of initiatives, schemes, and standards? If we look at the work we do at ControlUnion, take the roundtable on sustainable palm oil, a perhaps contentious one to pick, but they now have 4,000 members and 3.24 million hectares RSPO certified status, many of which we have certified, or the roundtable on responsible soy, which we are a member of. These are collections of companies that come together to try and forge a way forward as the looming scale of the task ahead to achieve sustainable food systems becomes clear, and people and companies realize we have no choice but to collaborate instead of doubling work. For organic, we are working with ORFC to help with certificate of inspections for organic produce coming to and from Europe, regardless of the organic standard that has been used. Again, an issue that all organic bodies will face and one that is dealt with better together. And more recently, as Liz was saying, we've launched an initiative for the development of regenerative agriculture. Here we're looking to collaborate with some of the UK's best organisations for the development of this initiative. We as ControlUnion do not have all the answers, but together with Agrimetrics, Cool Farm Tools, Soil Association, FWAG and Sustainable Food Trust, we'll be able to start working on ways to help farms transition to a more regenerative style of farming, be that on an organic certified farm in Devon or on a conventional arable farm in Poland. The use of the digital hub allows farmers to track their progress and gain useful insights into how regenerative practices are affecting their farm. We hope over time this data will empower farmers further and allow them to access carbon markets and future environmental credit markets. This is an open initiative. It's open to organic and conventional. The road to regeneration is a road we all need to take together, and we hope that Regen Agri can be a tool that delivers lasting change. In summary, labels, verification, and organic certification have a time and place, in my opinion, but it is up to us to work more collectively to communicate what they mean exactly and to ensure that they are working to a sustainable and regenerative future for agriculture. We need to collaborate across farms, organizations, and consumers to work to a best outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. And I think before I move on to ask you a point of information, I just wanted to clear up something. There's a question in the chat in the questions from Holly Whitelaw, who says that she'd understood that the Soil Association was looking to develop a regenerative label. That's not the case, Holly. What's happening is a number of organisations, as Harry mentioned, have joined to work with ControlUnion on Regen Agri, and I think it's fair to say that the work right now is to identify how best to support farmers to be able to transition to more sustainable farming practices, whether organic or not. And I think that leads on really to this whole debate about, what is a regenerative or an agroecological farm, and is that different to an organic farmer? And I think probably I'd leave that one now for Sarah perhaps to answer in her comments. But for you, Harry, I just had a question really about the impact of COVID and whether you think that going forward there'll be a long-term effect on how certification is carried out in the future. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've obviously had to deal with head on at ControlUnion. There has been the demand for certifications has been the same and is in some areas increasing, but how they are operated, it has had to be modified in some places. Some schemes you can't have off-site auditing and for initial audits as well. But I think there's scope for improvement in how tech can be used perhaps to monitor things over the long term. Doing an audit now, if you're not visiting, can take over 2 or 3 days instead of a day of a farm visit. And I think on the long term, I think COVID, although it has been terrible in some areas, will have a good effect in terms of people becoming more aware of where food is coming from and how far it's traveled, whether that translates into people being more interested in standards which measure carbon and footprint opposed to agricultural practice will be an interesting one to see play out, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about emissions, but whether that gets tied into the narrative on a more bigger scale with the consumers and the general public about how that feeds into agricultural practice will be interesting.
Harry will be back with us on the panel once we've heard from all our speakers. Up next is Joshua Wickerham, who's the Membership and Engagement Manager at ISEAL. And Joshua, if you could sort of address the initial question about the tools for lasting impact and whether we need any new ones. Over to you, Joshua.
Sure. Thank you, Liz. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to echo what other panelists have said, that collaboration is really important, and I want to parse that issue from the viewpoint of how ISEAL works with sustainability standards and related tools. So ISEAL is a membership organization for collaborative, innovative, transparent sustainability standards and similar sustainability tools. And ISEAL's codes of good practice are widely recognized as being useful for assessing the credibility of sustainability tools. And we summarize those, the implementation of ISEAL's codes of good practice in ISEAL's credibility principles, which are kind of at a glance way of assessing the credibility of practices in this field. So if we look at the impact of sustainability standards and sustainability tools, having a clear theory of change or a strategy of what the standard is trying to achieve is really important. There's a place for sustainability initiatives that are raising the floor, eliminating the worst practices in the market. That may be where some of the biggest sustainability impacts come from. Raising the ceiling on regenerative agriculture above organic is also important. But there are trade-offs. Are you protecting biodiversity on the farm? Will that decrease yields? It may increase yields, but we should be measuring that. Or are we going for efficiency on the farm and protecting other more biodiverse regions, no-go areas, protecting high conservation value forests, etc. Are you using a logo or no logo certification mark? How are you, being recognized? Are you aligning your work to the SDGs? And there are trade-offs in all of these. But it's another area that ISEAL codes cover is standard setting, making sure that the standard or the agreement of good practice includes farmers, is tested on the ground, is pilot tested. Increasingly, we're seeing that there's not one size fits all standard, but there may be a continuous improvement pathway that a sustainability initiative like the Sustainable Agriculture Network, SAN, is meeting producers where they're at and giving them the tools to improve their sustainability performance. And then a third area for ISEAL members is, and others that reference ISEAL's codes of good practice, is assurance or certification, verification, validation that the practices that are in the standard are being met. And increasingly, we're seeing lots of innovation in this field. For example, in North America, the organization Field to Market is using a very data-driven approach to assurance. They don't send auditors to the field. They collect data from farmers and they give meaningful data back to the farmers to help them improve. That being said, there are lots of certification impacts that are very positive. A 2018 meta study in the agriculture sector pointed to certified entities being more likely to adopt and then retain practices, or audits. Actually having an auditor in the field or checking the data will prevent slippage into bad practices. But the same could come from what Louise said about a more collaborative, local, community-based approach to certifying, to self-certifying with good practices to a standard. The claims that can be taken from a sustainability initiative should be commensurate with the sustainability impact they're having. So if you're raising the floor, a standard shouldn't claim to be best in class. And ICIL's theory of change is that by working with sustainability initiatives to improve their practices, those practices will improve over time. More collaboration can take place between, for example, governments and sustainability NGO sustainability initiatives. Sustainability standards and tools can be recognized in trade practices. Carrots and sticks can be put into policy, and that what gets measured gets improved over time. So the credibility principles we recently revised through a global multi-stakeholder consultation process. Some of the key points are a sustainability initiative should add value for all users of that standard, for the farmer, for the supermarket, for the fast-moving consumer good company, etc. Sustainability impacts should be clearly measured and communicated, both the negative and the positive, and mitigation efforts to eliminate or reduce the negative impacts and enhance the positive impacts should be communicated. Collaboration is really important, and measuring progress in lots of these areas. It's also important to be able to benchmark different standards and say clearly what this standard is doing versus a different standard. And there's lots of room for collaboration between sustainability standards. Recently, for example, Rainforest Alliance and UTS completely merged. They recognized that they had a lot in common, and they would be better off, more efficient, deliver better results working together. Lots of other sustainability initiatives are working hard to align the content of their sustainability criteria. Others are working to reduce the assurance or the audit burden on farmers, which is actually quite tricky to do, to get the certification bodies to agree that, so for example, if you get certified to organic, maybe you could also be recognized as meeting another sustainability standard or a supermarket requirement. And that takes a lot of trust between sustainability systems. So what we see at ICIL is through deeper collaboration, being clear about what our theories of change are, what our pathways to those change really are. Sustainability standards and other initiatives can build trust, get to know each other, and improve their impacts. We're also seeing a lot of innovation in the way data is collected, but that's my time, so I'll turn it back to you, Liz.
Okay, thank you very much, Joshua. That actually, do you know what? There's a question that's come into the chat just now, which really follows on from what you were just talking about, and it's this whole area of, you made the point about certification and standards can be quite onerous, and that does include a cost. And for smaller scale businesses, that can be really very hard. And this particular question's come from Jane, who I think must be up in Scotland. And I just wondered whether you've got any thoughts on possible solutions for smaller businesses that really want to have their produce, certified in whatever way. In this case, it happens to be organic, but they really can't sustain the current cost. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are, like Louise mentioned, participatory guarantee systems or group certification. Some sustainability initiatives, like the Better Cotton Initiative, for example, they're kind of one of these raising the floor initiatives. They don't charge farmers for the assurance process. They work with farmers to teach them in a very practical way in the field how to improve biodiversity, how to reduce pesticide use, increase yield, and increase their income. Then they spot check They collect the data, then they check the data. That would be a verification. And then there may be some additional third-party certification of that data, but that comes at the cooperative level. So we're seeing a lot, as sustainability mainstreams, hopefully more initiatives like this, more financing of the assurance process can be developed.
Thanks, Joshua. That's really helpful. And again, Joshua will be on our panel in just a few minutes. So now, Sarah, you've been really patient waiting all this time. I'd like to introduce you again to my colleagues, Sarah Thompson. Sarah is a member of our standards team and is very active in IFOAM. So Sarah, can you initially address the question, please, about the kind of tools that we need to see? Thank you. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And whilst in some respects it's never great going last, it's also been brilliant to be able to hear what my fellow speakers have to say. And I can see that in the response to this question that Liz has posed today, there's many synergies between what I have to say and what my fellow speakers have said, which is always a reassuring sign. So labels, verification and certification schemes all have one thing in common. They're all tools that are trying to attempt to assure something, to demonstrate that a good thing's happening or that a bad thing is being avoided. And these conceptual tools have a lot in common with physical tools in that depending on whose hands they're in, they can either be used to build something up or to smash it down. Essentially, they can do a good job or a bad job. So basically, to use a British idiom, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the worth of any of the tools out there can only be known by looking at whether they deliver on facilitating meaningful practice. Now, I'm not going to give a shopping list of the tools which I think are best and for what purpose, but instead I would like to run through the things that I think are important for helping to identify good and meaningful tools. So to do this, I think we need to start by thinking about what tools are trying to achieve. At their best, they can do a combination of things. They can help identify and promote good practice. They can provide a mechanism to encourage and reward those practices, such as through the market or through subsidies. And they can provide a benchmark for reflecting on what's been done, as well as an incentive for improving practices further. But it's, of course, inevitable that some will be better than others. So I want to talk about the things that I think should be considered when selecting a tool, and also the things that should be avoided. So firstly, I would say that good tools fundamentally need to be able to reward holistic farming practices, or at least help with the journey to get there. Ultimately, we know that we need systems level change if we're to achieve the change on scale that we need to see to mitigate the multiple crises that we face. And the tools we choose should be directly facilitating this. We also don't want greenwashing. We really don't have time to be tinkering around the edges, and tools that essentially are endorsing business as usual need to be avoided, or should at least be put into context. Of course, no tool is ever going to be a complete answer. It's simply a mechanism for facilitating something. So really the question is the tool genuinely going to deliver what it claims to? It's true that there are a growing number of new terms, schemes, labels, calculators, initiatives, verification and certification programs that claim to address the challenges that we face. Some even use the very same words to describe very different approaches along a spectrum that has business as usual at one end and fundamental systems change at the other. Now, if we're going to make a meaningful difference, our full support has to be behind those approaches that genuinely facilitate systems level change. Tools must not overpromise and oversimplify. Like those internet ads that say, this one simple trick will help you get rich quick. An example of this is schemes and claims around the apparent silver bullet of no-till. Now, of course, it makes perfect sense to avoid disturbing the soil for a multitude of reasons, but context is everything. If no-till is broadly being achieved through herbicides, on balance, is it really an improvement? Now, there's no question that no-till can be highly beneficial as part of a holistic system of land management. And it's particularly relevant in the geographies where regenerative agriculture is growing in popularity, such as the US and Australia. But the fact is that meaningful impact is rarely improved by doing just one thing. That isn't to say that single issues or metrics should be completely written off. Not at all. Of course, they can, and they do signpost to better practice, kind of like you could call them iceberg indicators. But what I do think is that they need to be considered in context. And this is a point that I know that others have already made today. So yeah, it's an important one to reiterate, I think. Another complexity is that we mustn't get blinded into thinking that unless it can be measured, it doesn't have value. There are loads of things that are really difficult to measure, particularly more qualitative aspects. So we need to be careful to not over-rely on a tool to do all the heavy lifting on impact. Real impact will always be beyond the borders of what any tool can measure. The tool is just a way to demonstrate and often reward impact. And we've seen that in the organic movement, where, as Louise referred to earlier, regulation is simply a tool for avoiding greenwash and to provide assurance about the meaningfulness of the term in the market. Organic standards are a floor, they're not a ceiling. They define minimum requirements, not maximum potential. And really, organic at its heart is more rightly defined by the principles of health, ecology, fairness, and care. Now, another thing to look out with good tools is that they're participatory. They should be useful to the practitioners who are actually using them. And that includes helping them to reflect, learn, and develop their systems further. In many respects, knowledge-intensive systems are the only really intensive kind of systems that I like when it comes to agriculture. It's inevitable, of course, that we're going to need to carry out some level of critique and comparison to identify whether things are as good as they sound. And I've tried to outline some of those aspects that I think we should be considering as part of that process. However, we also need to balance a healthy level of critique with a good dose of inclusivity. And this is for two reasons. Firstly, farmers, citizens, policymakers alike are all at different stages of the journey, and we're going to need a range of tools that meet them where they are to facilitate a shift in the right direction and to keep them moving, a point that others have made today already. And in fact, it's vital that these tools have continuous improvement built within them or are framed in the context of continuous improvement. This will help them getting co-opted for greenwash and ensure that they genuinely contribute to a better world. Now, another reason why inclusivity is important is because there is a lot more that unites than divides us. And we really must avoid this kind of circular firing squad when promotion of one meaningful approach is done by denigrating another. Let's focus instead on our efforts on changing hearts and minds that we will need to engage in order for global fundamental change to happen, rather than using tactics that might inadvertently undermine others working to the same broad ends. For example, I know that my fellow panelists and I all agree that the movements underpinning organic, agroecology, regenerative overlap far more than they don't, and spending time and energy comparing which is best is of limited benefit. And this is because there isn't a right answer. Context is everything. Liz, do I have time to finish off? I've just seen that you popped back up on the screen.
I think we probably better leave it there for now, Sarah.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll have time within the panel discussion. But the question, and really thank you so much, because you've really sort of laid out very clearly the prerequisites for all farm businesses or indeed food businesses in selecting, the kind of tools they need to be looking at. But I guess the immediate question is, what role does organic certification have in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, Louise covered this a little bit earlier, but I think really it's a vital tool in that it possesses many of the features that I have already outlined. And the great thing about it is that it's here now, it's scalable, it can be applied across continents, and its value is recognised. Now, maybe not so much here in the UK, but it's very telling that in Europe, in the Farm to Fork strategy, has set this 25% target for organic land in Europe by 2030, and that's in recognition of the significant environmental and health benefits that organic delivers. So, and whilst it's not perfect, no system is perfect. The fact that organic farmland at the moment is such a small percentage of global agriculture isn't because what organic standards deliver isn't good. It's because the enabling environment right now isn't right. And so that's to do with how farming is subsidized, through how what we pay for, as Louise referred to. So yeah, I think organic certification does have a very important role in delivering the kind of change that we need to see.
Lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Now, if we could bring all our panelists back onto the screen, that would be lovely, because we're going to move into our panel debate. And thank you, everybody watching, because we've got the most fantastic array of questions and really very much spoilt for choice. Looking at the chat, there's quite a lot about the cost and the sort of choice of verification and certification schemes. And I guess, but the one I wanted to ask all the panelists first, you know, given the sort of the framing for this session, that for farmers to be able to be supported to make transformational change in how they farm is so necessary if we're going to meet all the climate, nature and health crises that we face. So my question is this: do you think there's need for additional economic incentives, whether they be public or private, to really support the kind of change in order to make farming with nature the best option? Or can labels alone deliver this? I don't know who wants to start. I mean, I'll give each of you an opportunity to respond, because I think this is a really important question. Shall I pick somebody? Sarah, go on.
Okay, yeah, so I think we need a whole host of different approaches in order to really crack this nut. And the market mechanism is a key one, and in a way that's the one that's the best established, and it really allows consumers, citizens, to pay for the kind of world that they want to see. But of course, it's tying it so closely to personal economics creates a situation where it seems like it's only accessible to wealthy people, or it creates an illusion of luxury where this should be good food should be a right, not a privilege. And so we really do need the other systems in the background. So, well, not even in the background, in the foreground. So the subsidy, the public, so how farmers are paid, and the political kind of levers to make sure that good practice is front and centre. And when I say good practice, I mean ones that take into account positive environmental and social benefits as front and centre, rather than just based on what makes the most money.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And Harry, if economic incentives were to come in, on what basis do you think farmers might end up being rewarded?
Well, here in the UK, or are we looking sort of?
I think focus on the UK, because I guess it's Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting what Sarah was just saying, you know, as well. I think the problem therein lies with the label side of it. Is not everyone. It's very easy. Us all on this panel, we're all chewing from the same bit. You know, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So to this, it all makes sense, and the label is not so important, I suppose, for us, because we already know what to look for. We know which companies are doing what. So how that is communicated to consumers is very important. But on the farm, I think it will be for those environmental services and public goods that there's been a lot of talk about. It's still very unsure exactly how that's gonna work. So, I mean, what we're trying to do with Regen Agri is you know, if those subsidy schemes aren't going to work out in the way that we think they might, or aren't as accessible for farmers as we think they might be, then there's also going to be a fantastic opportunity for the agriculture industry to link with financial services in ways they haven't been able to before. There's a lot of stuff around environmental impact bonds and carbon credit markets, and all of it at the moment feels quite Wild West. And all of it isn't that closely regulated, or is very regulated incredibly differently. If you're going from voluntary markets, you know, it's a completely different ball game. So how that's going to play out is going to be quite tough. But I think it's important to make sure that we're all trying to give people who are producing food access to these markets in a fair way. That companies aren't just going to come in and leverage their position to be able to buy land or buy credits from farms and take that claims from them, because once that claim of emission reductions has been bought by someone else, that farm can no longer claim to be carbon neutral, for example. So that's not an answer. It's probably more questions, but it's quite difficult.
No, That's really interesting, actually, about the point about a farmer can really only sell those things once, and if a supply chain has taken it for their own ends, then the farmer can't use it elsewhere. Louise, have you got anything you'd like to add to this question about the need for economic incentives?
Yeah, I think that's something that we look at very fast. You know, we need to get subsidies or other economic incentives. I would, just as Sarah said, there's a whole range of measures that we need. And first of all, I would like to ask mainly governments to be coherent in what they support. And then we also may like to come to what are the disincentives, or can we help disincentivize what contributes to the public bad, if I can introduce that notion, as opposed to incentives to contribute to public good. So I think coherence is very, very important. I also think lifting a bottom line is very important. If we're just clear that glyphosate is forbidden, then we can already all move up to more sustainability in agriculture, whether we have standards, whether we have incentives or not. So I think also that is something that governments can do. And another way of economic rewards could also be the farm economics itself. And if I may go back to the farmers we saw at the beginning of this session, our friend from India and from Kenya, they simply look at input-output. And by using less inputs, being less dependent, eventually their reward is in their pocket. So I think this can be seen at several levels, but I think very, very important is that government regulations are coherent.
Thank you, Louise. And Joshua, anything to add on this point?
Sure, there's lots of room for government and policymakers to act to improve economic incentives for sustainable agricultural production, as well as the finance sector. We can look at more sustainable trade deals where a minimum floor of sustainability is built in. A government could say certain claims are not allowed on the marketplace, or bring coherence to some of the claims of market-based instruments. The EU has been working in that area. Overseas development assistance could fund more sustainable agriculture. The CDC, the UK Overseas Development Finance Institution, is funding some sustainably produced and certified production in Africa. Governments can give better loan incentives. In Peru, for example, FSC certified forest concessions have a lower interest on the loan for the land. It's not just developed countries that can act. There can be a lot more recognition of market-based instruments.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. I'd like to move on to a question now from the audience, in fact from Rachel Haller. She asks, when faced with lots of different certification schemes to choose from, should we be seeing them as addition to our own farm brand, or are they brands in their own right? You know, can we have too many labels? What's the best policy to follow? I think perhaps I'll just ask Harry and Sarah this one, if I may. So Harry, if you'd like to go first. So it's really about, you know, what is in the world of top trumps, which one should she go for?
I probably wouldn't give a direct answer to that. I don't know anything about her farm or what the, you know, there's so much to consider. I don't want to give a wet answer to this, but there's so much to consider. You know, what are you trying to achieve on your farm? What's important to you? Where are you? What are you selling? You know, for me to say you should go and pick this standard would be a bit outrageous, I think. I think what Sarah said in her talk was fantastic, you know, talking about organic being a flaw and the way that you can pick those tools. And I think if that's written down somewhere, what Sarah said, if you follow those steps, then I think you'll probably get to the right ends. I mean, I could obviously sell what we do, but I don't think that would be the right, and this isn't that sort of forum.
No, that's fine, Harry. And I guess, Sarah, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Harry said, but I suppose, yeah, what's the message that you're wanting to put out there, and what's the market you're trying to access? But also, I think it's worth considering the opportunity cost as well. So if you go for one over another, what's it saying by you doing that? Are you deliberately trying to give a message about one than the other? So like, do you want to prioritize one issue over another, or what are you trying to say? And also, how is that tool helping you, either in terms of, is it helping you to access a certain market, or is it part of your the development of your business? Like, is it helping you to improve practice on your farm, or to change things in another way? So yeah, I think there's no simple answer, apart from, of course, that I think organic does deliver a lot of those things, partly because it's so well known in the market and it's a mechanism that's been around for a long time. But that isn't to say that it can't work, and it does work in collaboration with other labels and schemes. So again, it just depends on what the message you're trying to give to your customers is.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And we had a couple of questions, really. They kind of relate to the ever increasing requirements on farmers and the sort of cost of certification. Holly Whitelaw is saying there's too much being asked of our farmers currently, and we already need to wean people away from cheap food. And Marion Harding making the point that certification recording can take a great deal of office time and effort, and I think it's an important point, detracting from the important practice of observation and good farming. And so perhaps they're rolled into one. Marion's asking, how do we persuade the public to pay for this? Because she's fearing that actually, as more is required, schemes will inevitably have to charge more. And Holly's asking whether or not the various schemes have approached government to pay for the cost of certification. And I do know that, for instance, in Denmark, organic certification is actually paid for by government. And I also do know that probably 15, 20, and Sarah will know better than I, 15, 20 years ago, organic certification was supported by government. So I guess the question to all of you really is how can we square this circle of ever more being required of farmers to really evidence their performance and the cost of it? So really to avoid the farmer having to pick up that tab for it. I'll start with you, Joshua. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure, yeah, I think thinking about jurisdictional approaches or landscape approaches where a whole province or state or region is meeting certain agricultural practices, and it's about education, and it's less about the monitoring. There is monitoring, there's data collection, but it's more about teaching the farmers what these practices are. And some of them may involve costs, but it's less about the cost of being certified and more about the cost of upgrading their practices. And I think, more collaborative community level checking of certification, more risk-based approaches, so more data collection from other sources where the cost of that can be pooled. So that could be a role played by certification bodies or others where there's information collected ahead of time, then the auditor may spend less time on the field, in the field. There are lots of efficiency gains to be made.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think certainly IT's got a role to play, hasn't it? Louise, have you got any thoughts on how we square this circle for farmers?
Well, much in the direction of Joshua, and maybe to add a couple of examples that we know, for instance, that currently in the country Austria, already 25% of agriculture is organic. Just imagine that. 1 on 4 farmers. We have regions where you're really an exemption if you don't practice organic practices. So there your approach could be an entirely different one. The regional governments could have an entirely different approach to what we currently know as certification. A completely different example that there is also watershed areas and drinking water providers, I think that's the word in English, that actually encourage their farmers, that do the measurement for them, because eventually they have understood that it's cheaper for their company if the farmers in the neighborhood and the watershed are all organic and don't use pesticides and harmful chemicals than actually cleaning the water. And so also there the costs come from another side. And then again, it really so much depends on the market where you are. If I do a local verification system, costs are not there, and we have a social incentive and even a learning pathway for farmers to work together. I think you cut us off, right? We go to the Zoom.
I think so. I'm really worried, Louise, that we're going to be cut off. So, look, I want to say thank you to all my speakers because it's been a truly brilliant debate, and I suspect we're just getting going. I'm hoping that you can all see the link to the Zoom cast now, because that's where we're going to go for the next half an hour. And I'm also hoping that for all my speakers, that Zoom link is available in just a second, hopefully. We're not going to get cut off at 2 o'clock, that's good. But if we all now move to Zoom, we can carry our conversation on and really finish answering some of these really, truly brilliant questions. So yeah, okay, let's all move to Zoom now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everybody for
Thanks,
now.
everyone.
See you at Zoom.